What's up everyone and welcome back to the MMA Zone. Today, let's get started with Alex Pereira changes mind about Jon Jones. It wasn't that long ago when Alex Pereira reported he was interested in doing some training with Jon Jones. And before we continue, make sure to leave a like on the video to help support the channel. But as the light heavyweight king prepares for his next title defense, it looks like Poatan has changed his mind on that. A few months ago, Pereira talked about training with Jones and reported he and Bones had been discussing the possibility for a while. At the time, Pereira said he wanted to experience what it was like training with the heavyweight champion. Recently, Bloody Elbow asked Pereira if he was going to train with Bones, and the Brazilian star said this through his interpreter. To be honest, I don't think that makes much sense anymore. Back when I said that I would like to fight at heavyweight, people already put the dots together and basically mentioned Jon Jones. That's something that is speculated even if it's just by fans, so I wouldn't want to go and train with him now. And then if we end up fighting, people will start saying a bunch of stuff about whatever in the fight. I think it wouldn't make sense now, but if we were to fight one day and then go train, I think it would make total sense. This isn't all that surprising to hear, given that Jones has repeatedly and respectfully expressed an interest in fighting Poatan. In fact, as you likely know, Jones has said several times he would prefer that fight versus one with Tom Aspinall. But based on the comments Dana White made, it certainly sounds like Jones versus Pereira is not in the UFC's plans right now, and that they're driving hard to make Bones versus Aspinall a reality. Meanwhile, Pereira has to get by Magomed Ankalaev next weekend at UFC 313, but what do you think? Could we see Jones face Pereira in 2025? Merab Dvalishvilli not interested in fighting Alexander Volkanovski. As the MMA world waits to see when and who Merab Dvalishvilli fights next, the bantamweight champion has made it clear he's not interested in throwing hands with Alexander Volkanovski. As this video is being produced, Merab has yet to be booked for his next fight. The consensus is that Dvalishvilli will likely be booked for a rematch with former champion Sean O'Malley. O'Malley has insisted he didn't lose their first encounter last September, and recently Dana White acknowledged there's a lot of fan interest in seeing Dvalishvilli versus O'Malley too. But if Merab does face and defeat O'Malley for a second time, the UFC could be in a jam in terms of his next opponent. After all, the Georgian has already defeated top contenders in Peter Yan and Umar Nurmagomedov, and other contenders like Deiveson Figueiredo and Corey Sandhagen are coming off losses. So while talking to Manuka Kopian recently, the topic of Volkanovski came up, and Merab proceeded to outline why he's not interested in fighting Alexander the Great. I love Alexander Volkanovski, man. He is one of the greatest, and I just really respect him. It's nothing like I don't want to take a risk, or it's not that I'm scared or something, but just have so much respect. Just don't want to fight Alex Volkanovski. Let's see what's going to happen in the future. Even Pantoja called me out. Let's see how everything plays out. There's no question Volk is a legend, and it'll be interesting to see if he reclaims the featherweight crown at UFC 314 when he faces Diego Lopez. If Merab does beat O'Malley and Volk wins the belt back, would you be interested in seeing Dvalishvilli move up to challenge for the 145 crown? UFC fighter reacts to FBI director's comments. Recently, new FBI director Kash Patel proposed a training partnership between the UFC and the FBI. And it looks like a lot of fighters are on board with the idea. Patel recently said that he's interested in having UFC fighters train FBI agents so that they can handle themselves better in self-defense situations. The statements immediately made headlines, and a lot of ex or current fighters were quick to respond. Case in point, former UFC light heavyweight champion Tito Ortiz had this to say about it while appearing on Fox and Friends. I think it's a brilliant idea, but make sure you get the right fighters. It's not really supposed to be as a fight, as if you're gonna punch and kick anybody, but to subdue a person down to the ground to put handcuffs on them the safe way for both persons. Justin Gaethje was also asked about Patel's proposal while he talked with TMZ. The lightweight contender reported he'll pick up the phone if the FBI calls him for the training gig. I think there's much more skilled people, but I got no kids, no wife, so if FBI Director Kash Patel needs somebody to go out there and serve some justice, I would love to be part of that team. I would love to be part of any part of that. I love representing this country. I can't wait to fly this flag, walk into the octagon. It's been a while since I've been proud to be an American, and we're back there. I'm excited to represent this country. Anytime anybody at that position needs my help, I'm more than willing. And the UFC's heavyweight champion Jon Jones also reposted the story on Instagram, which one could certainly view as an endorsement of the idea. But what do you think? Do you think it would be beneficial for FBI agents to train in mixed martial arts with UFC fighters? UFC updates. Let's take a look at some recent bouts that have been finalized by UFC matchmakers. Daniel Marcos recently announced that his next fight will be with Montel Jackson, set to go down at the UFC's May 3rd card in Des Moines, Iowa. Jackson is coming off a quick stoppage win over Damon Blackshear in July, which made it 5 wins in a row. Marcos, meanwhile, recorded a split decision victory over Adrian Yanez in December, which extended his record to 17-0. So that's a bantamweight fight hardcore fans have likely tagged as a can't miss. Team Iridium recently reported that Zachary Reese, and Dushko Todorovic will battle at the UFC's May 31st Fight Night card in Las Vegas. Reese will be looking to get back on track as he was stopped by Azamat Bekov at UFC 311 this past January. Todorovic is also hoping to get back to the win column as he's dropped consecutive fights to Mansour Abdul Malik and Christian Leroy Duncan. A third straight loss could end his run in the UFC. After missing weight for a scheduled fight at UFC Vegas 103 with Montana De La Rosa, Guillermo Cruz is reporting Luana Carolina is planning to move up to bantamweight. As Cruz noted, Carolina has had issues in the past making 125 pounds. Carolina last fought in July 2024 when she recorded a decision win over Lucy Pudilova. Marcel Dorf recently reported that the UFC has moved the scrap between Nora Cornell and Haley Cowan from UFC 315 to UFC 314. Cowan hasn't fought since April 2023 when she lost via decision to Jamie Lynn Horth. Cornoli, meanwhile, is coming off a split decision defeat to Jacqueline Cavalcanti in September. And in the Are You Serious category of fight announcements, the GFL's confirmed that Tony Ferguson is going to fight Dylan Dennis next. When the bout will take place has yet to be announced. El Cucuy has dropped 8 straight fights, while Dennis has not fought in an MMA bout since 2019 when he submitted Max Humphrey. If Ferguson loses this fight, you know that calls for the former UFC interim champion to retire will have never been louder. UFC analyst criticizes Ilia Topuria's decision. The MMA world is still buzzing over the news that Ilia Topuria has vacated the UFC's featherweight title to make a run at lightweight gold. But one person who is questioning whether El Matador really thought through his decision is Dean Thomas. If you follow Topuria, you know that for months he talked about moving up to lightweight to pursue that title. Then, more recently, many jaws were dropped when Dana White announced Topuria had dropped the 145 belt because he has too much trouble making weight. In addition, Ilia also apparently feels that there are no more challenges for him at featherweight. Well, while speaking with MMA Junkie recently, the former UFC fighter turned analyst, Thomas, had this to say about Topuria's decision. It's wild to me that he's giving this up now. There's no way a guy gives up pay-per-view points and his status as UFC champion this soon for no apparent reason and no real reason other than he can't make the weight. I don't necessarily buy that. He's a young guy. It may be uncomfortable for him to make the weight, but I don't necessarily believe that he can't make the weight. But if he wants to go up, let him go up. But it comes from a place of just that John Jones level of confidence and maybe a bit of delusion that you have to be a good fighter. But to think that you're just going to give up the belt and no problem, I'll just go get it at lightweight is such a wild way, such a crazy delusional way of thinking. No one's going to argue that Topuria is short on confidence, and really it's not surprising given he's put away 2 of the greatest featherweights of all time in Alexander Volkanovski and Max Holloway. But Thomas isn't the only person who has wondered if maybe Topuria could be rushing things here. If he can't make 145 anymore, that's one thing, but there were a lot of people who wanted to see him run it back with Volk or how he would do against Diego Lopez. Further, others, like Daniel Cormier, have questioned whether Topuria will be as effective fighting some of the larger lightweights like Islam Makhachev. But what's your take on all this? Is Topuria ready to challenge for the lightweight throne? Belal Muhammad sends a message to Shavkat Rakhmonov. Belal Muhammad and Shavkat Rakhmonov have sparred via social media and through interviews, but the welterweight champion won't deny Rakhmonov deserves to challenge him for the belt. Rakhmonov was booked to fight Muhammad at UFC 310 in December, but when the champion was sidelined with a nasty bone infection, Ian Machado Gary stepped in. Rakhmonov remained undefeated by working his way to a decision victory. On account of that win, the expectation was that Rakhmonov would finally battle Muhammad next. But more recently, the UFC announced that the Kazakh fighter is dealing with an injury, and so Belal will fight Jack Della Maddalena at UFC 315. Well, earlier this week, Muhammad spoke with MMA Junkie, and when asked about Shavkat, the champion made it clear he understands why the UFC wanted to book that matchup. I feel like he deserves it. He earned it with the Ian Gary fight. It's so easy to get injured in this sport. The training is the hardest part of the sport. We just saw it recently with Dan Hooker and with Arman Tsarukyan. It sucks. And like I said, me building my legacy, I want to take these guys O's. The next younger generation, that's the JDMs, that's the Shavkats. Unless there's a big fight with Joaquin Buckley or if he goes out there and gets a big win over somebody, I think he could earn it. But right now, I'm looking at him, then I'm looking at Shavkat. Hard to argue with any of this really. After all, not only has Rakhmonov gone 19-0 to date, he's finished 18 of those opponents. That includes finishes of notable welterweights like Stephen Wonderboy Thompson, Neil Magny, and Jeff Neal. The big question is, has Rakhmonov faced anyone in the octagon to date that has the cardio and wrestling that Muhammad does? What do you think? Or do you see JDM securing the welterweight crown on May 10th at UFC 315? The MMA community is demanding Dana White changes the gloves or finds a solution for eye pokes in the UFC. Two main events in a row, with Henry Cejudo losing last week due to eye pokes, and now Asu Almabayev losing to Manel Kape after two eye pokes back-to-back went unnoticed by the referee. Here's what the community had to say. At this point, MMA gloves about to be baking mitts. We need a big rule change, Dana, so the UFC brings the old gloves back after ditching the new gloves, which were made to prevent eye pokes, and two main events in a row end by eye poke. We gotta do something about these gloves. Listen, Kape outclassed him, but the UFC needs to change gloves. Two obvious eye pokes which were missed by the referee. Eye pokes are a huge problem, and Pride gloves is the only solution to that, but the UFC will not accept this because of their ego. Trevor Whitman gloves, but the UFC is cheap AF and doesn't want to cash out Whitman for them. How many eye scrapes and pokes are going to happen until the UFC does something about it? Does somebody have to lose an eye? There are other gloves that mitigate these problems. Rogan had talked about better gloves that are out there. Not sure why the UFC doesn't use them. Two main events in a row decided by eye pokes. Why don't UFC use Pride style gloves? Don't they own the design? Pride rarely had pokes compared to UFC. Dustin Poirier got roasted by a comedian at the Lafayette Comedy Roast Battle. Here's the clip.
Dustin, hold on, Dustin. I don't want to fight you. Actually, I ain't scared of you, bro. I know how to take you down, bro. All I gotta do is get behind the title. You'll never reach me. Assalamu alaikum.